Okay, excellent. Well, there's no time like the present. And I know the superintendent has a next thing. So calling this hearing of the City Council's Ways and Means Committee to order. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach. I'm the District 8 City Councillor and also the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. This hearing is being recorded. It's being live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and FiOS Channel 964. It's part of the Council's 6-week, really 2-month budget review process. We're having about 35 hearings and working sessions. This is one of them. And we encourage the public to come and testify at this or any of them. So you can do that by going to boston.gov/council-budget and seeing all the schedule. And then you can submit a video, which we'll attach to the hearing. You can come and testify in person while on Zoom, or you can send us an email at ccc.wm@boston.gov. And we're having 2 dedicated public testimony hearings, one on May 25th at 6 p.m. focused on BPS, and one on June 3rd, at 6 p.m. Focused on any aspect of the budget. So if evenings are better, come along then. And you can also tweet us your questions or comments at BOSS Budget. That's BOS Budget hashtag. We hope you'll get involved. This is another hearing focused on BPS. So this morning we talked about sort of all things academic at BPS. This afternoon we're focusing on Build BPS and future capital planning, on which the district has recently made some really major announcements. Parent and youth engagement, governance, school admission and assignment, and sort of everything that's under BPS's commitments 3 and 4 in its strategic plan, which are amplify all voices and expand opportunity. And we'll also be considering the BPS revolving funds, which this council sets the limits of at this hearing. So today's working session, it's formally on dockets 0524 to 0526, orders for the FY22 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations for the school department and for other post-employment benefits. Docket 0527 to 0528, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations. Docket 0529 to 0531, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. And then as mentioned, dockets 0532 to 0534, which are orders authorizing limits for BPS revolving funds. I'm joined here so far by my colleagues, Councillor Anissa Asabi-George, Councillor at Large, who is my Vice Chair on Ways and Means and also the Chair of the Council's Education Committee, and Councillor Liz Braden of District 9, and I know other colleagues will be joining shortly, but and I see one of them, yes, and Councillor Julia Mejia, Councillor at Large, has also just joined us. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to the superintendent and team.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, councillors, and thanks to the listening public for being on the call today. I am excited about these 2 commitments. These 2 commitments were direct commitments put in the strategic plan because of the community engagement that we had. As you know, I visited 125 schools, had over 100 meetings with the community and stakeholders. And one thing kept coming up, and that is that we needed to cultivate trust within the school district and involve everyone into authentic situations where we could amplify their voice and include them in shared decision making. And so as we've done that, Monica Roberts and her team have really worked to ramp up our engagement office. You'll hear a lot about the work that we're doing there. We've ramped up our interpretation services. Also, our translation services. It has been quite a challenge to do that, but it is a value of our board chair under Alex Oliver Davila and our whole school committee. We also made a huge announcement last week at school committee around Build PPS. Nate Cooter and his team and our facilities team and our engagement team actually has been working really closely on trying to work with our communities that have most impacted. He'll share with you an update around Build PPS and what we're doing with our facilities, and really exciting news about 4 major renovations and 5 new builds across the city. This is getting at the promise of having high quality schools in every neighborhood. And then I know that you're also interested in hearing a little bit more about school assignment and how that is shifting, particularly with the exam schools and AWC as we are, and EFA as we are thinking about more equitable opportunities and access to rigor across the school district, and the impacts that it had on our ability to test students while we were in the remote environment. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Miriam Rubin, who will bring you through the first couple of slides and then introduce the rest of the team. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Superintendent. And good afternoon, everybody, counselors. We can shift to the next slide. So as we've started every presentation so far, we ground our statement and presentation in this statement from the Opportunity and Achievement Gaps Policy. This statement continues to be the guiding principle upon which all of our work is guided, and which the work that we talk about today will be guided as well. The FY22 budget is a proposed $1.3 billion general fund allocation. And as we've discussed in prior hearings, it targets investments in academics, health and wellness, and community supports. The budget that we present today wouldn't be possible without our commitment of $100 million from the city over 3 years. We're in the second year of that commitment and have received an investment of $36 million this year in that second year. Our vision for FY22 is really structured around 3 main sources of funding. So our general funds budget, which we've talked about a lot so far, our federal funding, which is specifically intended to support us through addressing the impact of COVID-19 on our district, and then our capital funding, which we'll go into further in this presentation. This slide is a representation of the funding that we have received, and additional funding that we anticipate receiving from the federal government for COVID-19 recovery specifically, and will be an important piece of the puzzle as we plan for FY22 and beyond. We know that all of the plans that we present to you are part of a multi-year challenge and a multi-year strategy to work to support our students, both through recovery of COVID-19 and bringing us into a new state, a new and better state after COVID-19. So with that, we present our budget framework, which we've been using to really ground all that we do around returning, recovering, and reimagining what's possible for our students. Of course, within this framework, the federal relief funding that we're receiving is essential to supporting us in that work and fits into that framework as well. So with this, I'll hand it over to Chief Monica Roberts to talk a little bit about our engagement within our return, recover, and reimagine efforts with students, families, communities, and students.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having us. Just a little bit about the lens that we're bringing to the work. One of the things I appreciate about the district leadership, both at the schools committee and our superintendent level, is this lens for how do we engage our students, families, communities, and partners through all of our processes. And certainly I think we have more work that we can do, but very proud of the work that has been happening. In particular, as a district, we've been having a lot of conversations with our broader community about this idea of return, recover, and reimagine. What does it take for us to return to school in ways that felt comfortable for our families, students, staff, as we've been talking about recovering? How do we address some of the challenges that were presented through the pandemic, but also how do we capture on the learning that happened during that time? Some of our students did very well. We also learned a ton about our families' ability to engage, and we can provide other opportunities besides in-person opportunities. And so that is part of what we've done. Over the course of last summer through the fall, as we had these conversations, we reached over 14,000 families between online sessions and family surveys just to get feedback. And so our budget is framed with the feedback of our broader stakeholders, and in particular our families and students, and the investments that you see also. As we look forward in thinking about the work of the relief funds coming in and the work that the Extra Commission is doing, one of the fundamental pieces of this work will be having these public discussions with all of our stakeholders to get their feedback and then to share that back with the Commission so that their recommendations all align with what we're hearing from those who are most impacted by our decisions. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you. As we think about the office overall in terms of the work of our office, part of what we've done during the pandemic is found various ways of supporting our families, to making sure families have access to their questions, access to information they need through our family helpline, which we plan to continue, really supporting and working with our school-based family liaisons. And as you'll note, we're expanding that to every school. We talked about that previously, and this is really important for making sure our families have someone on the ground at the schools who speak their language, but also who can coordinate with our office in terms of really building the capacity of school-based staff and supporting them as well. And then additionally, through our Countdown to Kindergarten program, we're pleased to share that we have looked at ways that we can also use parents as ambassadors, both for supporting other families, but also recruiting other families. And so we look forward to using that model as well as we support our families. Lastly, our broader team within our office is really working on building the capacity of all school-based staff in particular. So we provide professional development for our educators. In addition to our family liaisons, we provide technical assistance around looking at the data and connecting it back to family engagement strategies. And we will continue to do the work of community engagement and continue to work on that muscle. And finally, the work with partners is a work that we continue to really work on. Our partners have played a critical role during the pandemic in terms of standing up out of school time programs for families, making sure that families had access to a safe place to put their children, and playing a part in our recovery efforts in terms of providing a space and place for us to provide tutoring for some of our students and families as well. So that is some of the work we've been doing, and I'll talk a little bit more about Welcome Services, which is responsible for our registration work a little bit later. Thank you. I believe I'm turning it to Nate.
Thank you, Monica. As we charge a transition, we want to start talking about what it's going to take for us to return strong and also to begin to reimagine what is possible for our students. You can move to the next slide. Part of what we've been working on, and I think this may be, Monica, another slide for you, but just talking about the school admissions and assignment system and thinking about the ways in which schools navigate, or students and families navigate, our overall system, which is going to be a theme that carries from what Monica's talking about now into the systems and structures we're trying to solve within Build BPS.
Thank you, Nate. One of the things I want to talk about is we've done a lot of work to help families navigate and improve the information available to families around the school choice process. We know it's very complex with a home-based assignment system, which is individualized to every person's address. And so we've done a ton of work to, one, train partners so that they understand the process, and as they're talking and work with families, they can share that information. Two, as I talked about with, in particular, the Countdown to Kindergarten Family Champions, working with families and training them to help us support families in ways that are accessible language-wise and in terms of being connected and in the communities. We also have done the work to move our processes online and by phone, which has been very successful and worked well for many of our families. Even as we reopen centers, we have found that many of our families still prefer to access our services remotely, and that's something we're looking at how we continue to maintain. We believe that that provides easier access for our families. And then lastly, we're also thinking about how we better conduct outreach. And so we've done some interesting things in terms of particularly, I want to use really focusing on areas where we know our families are often hearing about information for registration late or are just not as aware. And so we've done some interesting things around setting up streaming ads. I'll talk a little bit about those to really focus on the neighborhoods where we find registration to be late, and therefore families are less likely to get their first choice or second or third choice school. The last note I'll say, and Chief Cooter might talk a little bit more about this, but as we think about enrollment overall, we've been doing some work to better understand what's happening around enrollment. We reached out to our partners at the Council of Great City Schools just to see what's happening in the overall country. And what we are seeing is that what's happening in Boston in terms of declining enrollment is a theme of what's happening across all of our big cities in the nation. Also, some data that they shared is that, in particular, Boston, Massachusetts has seen a decline, one of the largest declines nationally among persons obtaining permanent resident status and naturalizations between 2017 and 2019. We know that for Boston Public Schools, among our highest new enrollees are some of our immigrant families. And so we understand that that may have an impact on our enrollment. I will also say that if the challenges are not just being experienced by Boston Public Schools, but as we have conversations with our counterparts in the charter and parochial school sector, they are seeing similar things. And so part of what we're doing is all of us looking at how do we recoup market share in the face of declining school age population potentially within the city or that we might have access to. With that, we can go to the next slide and I'll talk a little bit about how we've been trying to do that. We've been doing things that we usually do, like putting ads on buses and train stations and billboards throughout the city. Again, a lot of our focus areas are based on the data that we see in terms of who's coming late and who's less likely to have the information that we need them to have. But we've also tried new things like geofencing, which I had never heard of before this year's registration season, where we are identifying areas of the city, geographic areas, and kind of drawing a border, if you will, and saying anyone who has a device, a cell phone or any personal device who is on it, we can advertise to them. So if you're walking, for example, looking at something on your on the internet on your phone, you might see an ad pop up about Boston Public Schools. And because many of our families are using their phones, we thought this was a good way to market. In addition, we mailed postcards to every family in the city that has school-age children. Again, we're also looking at recouping market share. So even if they have children enrolled in other districts, we did market to them. We tried new services, so streaming services, both radio and television, like Hulu, Netflix, and iHeartRadio, as well as using ethnic radio stations. These are just various ways that we've not used before that we're trying now to see if we can increase our access to families. We're also monitoring and asking families, which of these ways are the ways you've heard about registration, so we can continue to invest where we've seen to be most impactful. And then lastly, we've really updated our registration videos to make them shorter, tighter, have them in the languages. We can send them by text and in other ways to all of our families, and we've shared those with partners as well. And we've seen some uptick there in terms of people using that. And then again, we always leverage our partners as ways to share information. We will continue to do so. Those are just some of the things that we're doing and trying to be a little more creative in the ways that we're reaching our families. And with that, I will now turn it to Chief Cooter. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Roberts. And as I mentioned, we're going to transition now to talking about reimagining BPS and really thinking about becoming the district that we want for our students. As you know, and we've said before, that we can't just return to the district that we were. We have to start thinking about some of the structures and barriers. We need to address some of that. And that is the context with which I wanted to present on Build BPS. One of the things that we are looking to do overall is bring a coordinated conversation around what we're doing with our operating budget and what we're doing with our capital budget as a way to really meet the goals, the educational vision for our district. On the next slide is one we presented during the school presentations on the operating budget. We're really starting to think about our facilities and learning environments and recognizing that the structures and the buildings in which our students learn is impactful on them, both in terms of what we are signaling to them in terms of their value, and then also what opportunities they have for learning. You can't learn 21st century science and STEM in an old lab. You need access to modern facilities. We're also thinking about inclusive strategies. And some of it is getting back to the basics and the core work of ADA compliance, but really thinking about how students and instruction and teachers interact with their environments, how they flow through the school, how are there literal physical barriers to what we're trying to do with inclusion. And then finally, we are thinking about how do we have this conversation with our communities, either through regional partnerships of schools and with individual school communities so that we can bring them into the conversation through authentic partnership. We proposed our FY22 capital budget in partnership with the Office of Budget Management from the City of Boston, as well as the Public Facilities Department. It's $163 million, which includes $78 million in capital repairs and district-wide initiatives. Those are the investments that we're making in every school building across the district to both maintain the buildings better than we ever have before, and also upgrade the educational experience for those students who are not in a building that will be part of a major project. Of course, the other big announcement that we're tremendously excited about are 9 major projects. This includes 4 major school renovations to leverage our existing school communities. This morning, I've also already gotten questions about our use of the Edwards building. But as we start to phase out our standalone middle schools, our plan is to make sure that we use all of those schools for an educational purpose going forward. And then, of course, the major projects, the 5 new school buildings in 4 different neighborhoods, including the Horace Mann School for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, which we are partnering with we are submitting to the MSBA in hopes to partner with them to build a brand new state-of-the-art facility for one of our highest needs populations. The next slide does show the cash flow of Build BPS. What this slide shows in blue bars is the cumulative spending. How much of the $1 billion commitment have we spent to date by fiscal year, and how much are we projected to spend over each of the fiscal years? The bar for FY22 shows that we have spent $460 million, and with a budget of about $162 million, or $163 million, excuse me. I read the wrong bar. $297 million spent year to date, which is up through FY21, with $163 million planned spending in FY22. That represents $460 million overall of the $1 billion. Of course, there are some projects that are going to, that have already been committed that will continue to use that cash flow. And we do anticipate that this is the first part of what we need to really refresh. What we're trying to do is launch a new cadence so that we build 2 to 3 new major school buildings every year. And this capital plan puts us on schedule so that we are fulfilling that commitment by 2027. On the next slide, we have organized our Build BPS announcements and the capital plan around 3 guiding sort of levers. The first is equitable academic access, trying to trying to create predictable pathways and make sure there's equitable access to those pathways. As Councillor Edwards mentioned this morning, we have already rolled out the K-6 712 pathway in East Boston, guaranteeing a single transition for all students and families in that neighborhood and in Charlestown. We want to be able to extend that and make that same statement across the district. We're thinking about excellent buildings. There's nothing overly complicated. We think we need to upgrade all of our buildings, with 2/3 having been built before World War II. This is just not an acceptable state of educational facilities, and we need to modernize and start building new buildings. Those first 2 categories are really about how we plan to spend our money. The third category is about predictability and transparency. It's how we do the work. For too long, the community has felt that the Build BPS has not been a transparent process. It has not been an honest conversation with them. We have not been clear on what we are aiming to do and how we intend to do it. And this new phase of Build BPS under Superintendent Caselli's leadership is really pushing us to have a more open conversation than we've ever had before. As I've said internally many times, I want Build BPS to be the worst kept secret in the district. I want people to know what plans we have, what our strategies are, and where they are in the queue. I'm going to go quickly through the next 3 slides, which highlight the commitments that we made for FY22 in each of these different categories. The presentation that I gave to school committee last Wednesday highlights how we move from our overall vision to the specific projects in any given category. This is just the highlights. So for predictable pathways, the big announcements here are that we are announcing the close of the Irving and Timilty Middle Schools at the end of next school year. There's nothing new happening at the end of this school year around school closures. Families will have the next year to understand their options and understand where they can enroll in the following school year. This also allows us to launch a community conversation about the future use of each of these buildings. And each of these 2 buildings will be used for BPS facilities in perpetuity. The second is that we want to start having a conversation about expanding access to high quality pre-kindergarten. We heard this morning the importance of K0 and K1. We have great partnerships with our community-based organizations, but we also want to think about how we can leverage our buildings differently. We have many K-8s that have under-enrolled 7th and 8th grades. We want to start having conversations with those communities about taking the 7th and 8th grades in and including them in high school, into our secondary schools, while then using those classrooms to create new high-quality K0 and K1 classrooms in our BPS schools. Again, no changes for next year. This is the start of the engagement process with your school communities. And then finally, high school redesign, which was the topic for this morning, but I'll just say again, we are planning to present to school committee in October a plan for our high school portfolio that sets the course for how we start to organize and the changes we start to make to our high schools. We know we want to increase rigor. This is about making a higher quality academic, extracurricular, and total high school experience for our students, and being really intentional about what high schools we have, what the portfolio is, and how do we make sure that all students have access to those rigorous programs. The next slide covers excellent buildings. The first thing we need to do is balance capacity and boost the student experience. We are unfortunately announcing the close of the Jackson Mann K-8 school in Alston Brighton, again at the end of next school year. And this is in response to a facilities emergency and the lack of available swing space that we have. This is an unfortunate situation that we're in, but we are planning to use that parcel in the future for a future K-6 school. So again, not planning to divest of any of our properties, but really thinking about how do we make sure that we don't end up in this situation again, where we have a school building as the Jackson Mann, which needed to close. The exciting announcement is launching 5 new school building projects. But in addition to that, coming back to the community in the fall with a clear list of all our schools and when we want to announce that they will be rebuilt. We have been reluctant to say to everyone, this is the order of operations for new school buildings. One, because it's an ambitious proposal. We would need to build 2 to 3 new schools every single year for the next 50 years to replace all of our buildings. I don't know if you've met the superintendent, but she is bold and she's willing to say that is what we're launching today. What we want to do is then say to people, here's where you are in the queue. And that may mean that some school communities are going to find out what they may know, which is that they're not getting in a new school building for several years, which gets into the last category around upgrading our facilities. We are committed to getting out of the hole of deferred maintenance that we've been decades in the making, and to continue to upgrade so that there are modern facilities. We talked a lot about libraries this morning, outdoor play spaces. For those buildings that are not going to go through a major project, we are committed to outlining a schedule so that there is a changed student experience and access to 21st century learning opportunities at those buildings. The final category, of course, is predictability and transparency, and one that is really critical to restoring trust and faith in the system. The first is that we want to make sure that we are putting equity at the center of our strategic planning. There has been a belief and a lack of understanding about how we have used equity in the past. And honestly, there's not been a transparent process for using equity for a capital budget process. We are committed to looking at our data. We launched our first equity analysis of the capital budget this year, and there's a lot of work still to be done. The second is, of course, authentic engagement and partnership, having this conversation with school communities, with communities around how do they want to use their building, and how do we engage with the communities. Oftentimes our constituents for new school builds are people who have not yet enrolled in BPS, or maybe not even have families yet, but we want them to stay in the city. We want them to be invested in our buildings. We want them to be invested in our schools rather. So we need to figure out how to authentically engage and partner with them. And then the final thing is just to publish more information and make it accessible in terms of transparency for our data. So people understand how do we get to the decisions that we make. This includes transparent dashboards that let people know the condition of their building and how it relates to their condition, how that relates to their prioritization in the new building plan that we mentioned would be released in the fall. The last thing I want to cover as it relates to Build BPS is we do have a number of upcoming community meetings, most targeted towards the communities who are affected by the announcements that we made, including the Jackson, Man, Irving, and Timilty communities. There are dates on there for East Boston and Charlestown conversations related to the Edwards School, which is slated to close at the end of this school year. And so what we want to do is begin to have the conversation with these communities around what supports that they need, what opportunities they want for their students, so that when we present this plan for formal vote to the school committee in the fall, that we have a detailed plan that has had community input around what supports we provide to those students. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Miriam to close us out for today and look forward to your questions.
Thanks. We just want to remind everybody that materials for this presentation and all budget materials are available on our website at bostonpublicschools.org/budget. And the next slide just shows a list of the hearings that we've already had around the budget, and then upcoming hearings as well, and our opportunity for public comment. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Councillor Balk.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks for the presentation. I'm going to go straight, as has been our want, to questions. I'm pretty sure Councillor Asabi-George, my vice chair, but I got to pull up this. It is indeed. And I should know that a while back we were also joined by Councillors Ricardo Arroyo, District 5, Councillor Andrea Campbell, District 4, and Councillor Matt O'Malley, District 6, and our President Pro Tem. All right, without further ado, Councillor Asabi-George.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks everyone again for a repeat thorough presentation on some of these key issues through this budget process. I do have some additional questions around Build BPS, but I will save them and just reach out because that presentation was actually really good, and many of my questions were answered. But I'd like to go a little bit deeper in the weeds, so I'll do that offline. The question I'd like to ask, at least for this round, and Madam Chair, I may just have one round in this afternoon's hearing. Some of you may be happy to hear that. I am curious about the governance, the school committee structure, and some of the challenges around the relationship between BSAC, BPS, the student representative, and the school committee, as well as the school department, sort of just generally. Have we been able to so a couple questions. Have we been doing some work towards mending those relationships? And, I know we have a new student member on the school committee. I'm excited about re-engaging student voice in the school committee, and also wondering if we've set aside any funding to support the student rep to BSAC. I think for me, it's very important. It's some work that we've been doing behind the scenes to complement the work to get the student member the opportunity to vote. But wondering about the funding for the student member and, any work that's been happening to better engage youth voice and student voice in the school committee.
I can start. So thank you for that question. We actually have been meeting, myself and the superintendent have been meeting with BSAC quite regularly. I believe the superintendent has met with them almost every week, if not every other week. We're in discussions in regards to what does BSAC look like as we move forward, and what does that mean in terms of some of the design work that we need to do. So we've been working on that collaboratively, and my team has been working alongside the young people as they're generating their ideas. So I think we're in a good space around that. We've had a number of really good conversations, and I believe we will have something to share around structure and kind of where we land collectively at sometime in June. So that's the goal that the young people are working towards. As it relates to funding for the student rep to school committee, I believe that actually requires a shift to state legislation. So it's not just something that the school committee can do. And I know we've shared that with the BSAC members as well as school committee. So we'll see where that goes moving forward.
So in relation, sorry, Monica, to that piece on the stipend, I don't know, we don't refer to it necessarily as compensation, but a stipend for each member of the school committee. I understand, the change that we need to make in state law to make that happen. We've had some of those discussions through this budget, though. Can we set aside that dollar amount, which I think is $7,500? So as we work on that through our legislative process and through our advocacy and our efforts, that we know, we're confident that that funding is available on the other end. So once obviously we're optimistic and hopeful that this will get passed, the stipend piece in particular, that the student could then receive those monies.
I am going to make note of that, as well as I'm sure my colleagues from finance are probably doing that right now. So Chief Cooter, I see you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to support that if and when the legislation changes. I'm not concerned about available funding being a barrier to this one. Rare thing for me to say, particularly in a public hearing, but I do. We all support Youth Voice and are looking forward to seeing where that goes.
Okay, so I'm just gonna send you probably an email at some point today saying thank you, Chief Cooter, for expressing support and recognizing the availability of funds for student stipend.
Councillor,
also on the record and recorded, so we can clip it if we need to.
Yeah, I was going to say we have it on the record in a lot of ways, and the superintendent has, made her support clear of student voice, and a number of these different areas that we're talking about here. So I think we're all on the same page. It's a matter of, the legislation being passed.
Great, thank you for that. And then just sort of an extension of the BSAC and student voice conversation, as we work to restructure and rebuild and strengthen and support the work of Youth Voice, how are we with a student representation from all of our schools? And, certainly understanding that COVID has maybe created some challenges, but how important it is to make sure that every school is represented, high school in particular, and BSAC is represented through BSAC.
Yes, so this year we did have 100% participation. We usually do start our outreach in terms of recruitment in the spring. Given that we're working with our students, current members of BSAC, to really think about how we move forward, they have asked that the district and our schools not recruit right at this moment until that is complete. So we do not have 100% representation right now, as we know some members have chosen to leave their seats. And so we will be working towards that next year. We feel confident that we'll be able to have 100% representation as we have had in the last 2 years.
Great. And just, for me, Madam Chair, just making sure that we have the appropriate funding in place to support those efforts for that work going forward, especially through this sort of rebuilding phase and then into the next school year. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Monica, Nate, and Megan.
Thank you so much, Councillor Sabi George. Next up is Councillor Braden, District 9, and I did neglect earlier to mention that Councillor Edwards from District 1 is here as well. Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the team again for a very comprehensive and detailed presentation. Let's see. In terms of the capital upgrading of buildings, I know there's tremendous effort and a lot of investment going into building new buildings, and yet we have a lot of old buildings that need maintenance. I know we've done a lot with air exchangers and ventilation and windows. We don't want to find ourselves in a situation like in Alston Brighton, where we need to find swing space and we don't have school buildings that are available, or lose a school building because of maintenance issues over a long period of time. So I think we're trying to right the ship at this point. But in terms of capital repairs in Alston Brighton, do you have a wish list of repairs for those other remaining school buildings? And then also with regard to the Jackson Man, reassigning students at the end of the year, what is the strategy? What is the schedule for that? And what is the outreach to families, and what is the anticipated landing spot for those students in the district in Alston Brighton? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braden, and thank you for the question about our need to get out of this cycle of building emergencies. Build BPS has been plagued by with the West Roxbury Education Complex and the Jackson Man School, these building emergencies that have not allowed us to be strategic in how we think about upgrading our buildings, and instead reacting to building failures. Our approach to that is twofold. One, many of you already know our new Chief Operating Officer, Indy Alvarez, who's coming over from the city side. She has already started the work on making sure that we have clear facilities data and are using data to drive a refresh schedule. And so I think she's on day 41, so I don't want to make too many commitments for her, but I know that's been something that she's immediately concentrated on. And so that having a predictable schedule of maintenance and understanding where our buildings are is one important lever for us to be able to make sure that we don't end up with a building coming offline. But the Jackson Man also presents an opportunity for us to talk about how we want to use new buildings as a way to start to alleviate some of the deferred maintenance and modernize multiple school buildings. And so we are committed to using that parcel for a school in the future. And in particular, we want to make a new K-6 school on that site, a new school building on that site. But we plan it to be for one or more of the existing school communities in Alston Brighton. So as you know, we have great schools in Alston Brighton, the Gardner, the Winship, the Baldwin. I shouldn't have started naming them, although I could name all of them, the Mary Lyon and the Edison. All of these schools are great. Many of them need significant upgrades and repairs. So you can imagine a scenario where when we launch this new school building project, after working with you and the Alston Brighton community to identify which school or schools will be part of that new build, then that can be the start of a planning process in the community. So the new build opens on that Jackson Man site, and the new school, one of the school communities moves in. Then we use that parcel of land for the next school project, modernizing that facility. So rather than having to find swing space, rather than trying to find new parcels and some of the things that have plagued our ability to modernize our buildings in the past, we can now start a predictable process in the neighborhood. This is slow moving. It's going to take a long time. But by consistently working in this direction, we'll be able to modernize so that 10 years from now, everyone believes in our capital planning process because they've seen 10 years of success, and they've seen how we've reduced our overall deferred maintenance load and how we've been building new buildings consistently for that time. And so that's kind of the way that we're thinking about it and why we're excited about launching these new school buildings for existing BPS school communities.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think having a predictable schedule for maintenance is really important. What do you think? I know you've just applied to Massachusetts School Building Authority. Is that what you call them? To get the Horace Mann in the pipeline. What do you think is the turnaround time for the Jackson Mann? And it also co-houses the community center. So I know this is a very preliminary conversation, but will we envision rebuilding the community center on that site as well? Because it's an integral piece of the bridge between schools and the community. The community center extends the school day and does all sorts of complementary activities to what happens in school.
In terms of the MSBA process, so we will be asking the City Council to vote in support of our submissions to the Mass School Building Authority for three things. The first, or for two things, the Accelerated Repair Program, which is the maintenance for roofs, boilers, windows, and doors. And then also, as you mentioned, what we call a core project, which is the new school building for the Horace Mann School that is currently active. We will be submitting that this month. For the Jackson Mann building, we can only submit one core building project each year. So we're planning to submit that building next year after the community engagement. So the way the MSBA process works is you start by naming the existing school community, and then you can submit to the MSBA for a new build. So that will be, our plan is to try and submit to the core building next spring for that parcel. I know, and I think Megan, I saw you queuing up. I do know that the city has money in the capital budget for the community center in Alston Brighton, and the public facilities department is working with BCYF around that. In terms of the long-term sort of co-location at that site, we are open to it. I think this is part of the superintendent's hub school strategies about making sure we're leveraging community partners early and often in everything that we do. There are some nuances to how that impacts MSBA, but that is for us to figure out. What we really need to do is make sure that our community and our students are well served by the buildings and assets in the community.
Thank you. I am sure I've exhausted my time, Madam Chair.
Councillor or Chair Bach, can I just add one thing?
Yeah, sure, that's fine. Yeah, you have 1 minute left, so I'll let Megan.
Yeah, you're always on time, Councillor Braden. I do just want to emphasize a couple of things that Chief Cooter said. One, the Jackson Mann site will remain a BPS property and is going to be a beautiful brand new building that one or more of our schools can move into. Two, the city of Boston, we can't speak for BCYF, but we obviously talk to them quite regularly, and the city of Boston is committed to ensuring that a community center remains in Alston Brighton. And I think, it makes a lot of sense to think about how this could be a model. The current model that we have could certainly be something that works for the future. And in this year's budget is that feasibility, is the capital dollars on the feasibility study for BCYF. So all committed to all of those things.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Councillor Braden. Next up is Councillor Mejia, and then it's going to be Councillor Arroyo. Councillor Mejia.
Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So, family engagement is one of my favorite things. So, I'm here for all of it. So just curious about the BPS commitments. Can you talk to me which schools? You said there were some schools that were going to get major improvements and some new schools. Can you tell me where that is, please?
We announced 9 major school projects. The 4 major renovations are related to our middle schools. So it's the Edwards Middle School, the Irving Middle School in Roslindale, the Edwards in Charlestown, the Irving in Roslindale, the Timothy in Roxbury, and then an ongoing project, which is actually beginning construction this summer, is the McCormick Middle School in Dorchester. And though the McCormick, while we've been talking about it for a long time, this is the first time it's been in the capital budget. for us, and we're excited about that project.
Can you- go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Do you want me to go through the 5 new school buildings? The 5 new school buildings are Harris Street in East Boston, which Councillor Edwards had brought up earlier today, which will likely be the expansion of an existing elementary school. Announcing new builds, we're in the process of finding sites for a new build in Roxbury and in Dorchester near the Mattapan line, sort of southern part of Dorchester. The Horace Mann School for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. And I shouldn't have done this off the top of my head because I'm now needing to look at my list to find the 5th.
Okay,
I believe it's the Alston Brighton K-6.
Okay, so then I just have a few follow-up questions. I'm curious about, I know we've been hearing from a lot of folks within the Mattapan area about eventually having a high school or some sort of presence of a high school. Any reason, any opportunity for that to happen at some point?
Yeah, we have not announced new high school builds as part of this for 2 reasons. The first is part of the high school redesign is working with the high school heads of school to understand what our portfolio needs to be. Part of that portfolio is both the geographic distribution of schools in Mattapan. Do we want and need a high school in Mattapan? I know I've been budget director long enough to have been asked the question by Charles Yancey. And the other question is, what are the focus of the different high schools? Do we need an arts high school? Where should we have a distribution of STEM high schools as well? The other reason that we have not focused on high schools in this next wave is high schools have been part of the major construction projects that are underway and have been open. So we have the Boston Arts Academy, we have Josiah Quincy Upper School. We've done some major renovations to get ACC in Hyde Park. The McCormick project is a high school project. We need new modern elementary school buildings, and that's part of the strategy that we're emphasizing here.
Got it, Nate. Don't be trying to skim my time up in here.
Will you try to get rid of my filibuster?
Yes, I am. Not with me. Okay, so let me just ask a few more questions, okay? How are we making space for parents who may not be able to read or write in their native language in terms of engagement? Would love to hear some of that. I know last year I talked about language interpretation. This year I'm on the reading write kick, so I'd like to hear about how you're engaging families who may struggle with that. Can you share some feedback which informed budget priorities? Like, how was that feedback informed? How does BPS take that information and feedback given from the community and implement them into their budget priorities? I know that you guys are doing that, but would like to know some specifics about what that looks like. How many families have you reached through the virtual info sessions? And what times are they normally held? And I'm curious, how are we ensuring that all schools have a school site council, and that these school site councils are open to parents from all different backgrounds, including parents who speak languages other than English, parents of students with special education, and parents who may be working during nights and weekends? I know that engagement is always hard, so would love to hear a little bit about that.
Okay, I am going to try to, go ahead.
No filibusters.
No filibusters. I'm going to try to make sure I capture all of them, and if I miss any, let me know. In terms of providing access both at the school and district level for our families who may not be literate in their home language or English, one of the things that we have been doing is holding any of our community engagement meetings. We do hold them in the 8 languages. And in addition to that, the meetings that we have in English also have interpretation in all of our major languages, so that we can make sure that families are able to listen and have access and able to ask questions. And we are purposeful and intentional about making sure that we pause and provide opportunities during any of these meetings to ask our interpreters to check in with our families and see if there are questions or comments that they would like to offer. And we find that families are very responsive. The language-based meetings in particular, because we know sometimes folks will feel more comfortable if they're able to express themselves in their home language. And so we do that work in partnership with our Office of English Learners. They have staff, in addition to staff on my team, who speak some of the native languages of our family, so they are able to provide support around that. And then we also have the District English Learner Advisory Council, and for each of the languages, we have a English Language Advisory Council, so we might have one for our Spanish-speaking families. Those are serving as additional spaces we're able to reach our families. As it relates to outreach and information access, we are making sure that all of our things, in addition to being sent in writing, we're doing our robocalls in the language. We're also starting to do new things around using ethnic radio. So when I talked about the registration pieces we run on La Mega and all these various stations to provide information. And as we're thinking about ESSER, one of the things we've talked about is having some of our staff who speak various language to go on and do a session to ask some of the questions that we're asking in the community meetings as an additional space. We've heard a lot from our community about using radio, not just our other mechanisms. So that's kind of around the engagement pieces and information access at the district level. At the school level, one of the reasons why we did a lot of vetting for our family liaisons in our office, so that our family liaisons went through 2 interview processes, first with our office to, one, make sure that they have the skill set to be able to actually do the work that we're asking, and then 2, we require a language assessment to make sure that they're actually proficient in the language that they say they are. That is so that our families in every last one of our schools has someone who can speak the language. So we hire someone with the who represents the majority language in the school, particularly if those languages are not represented among the staff. They do a lot of the work with our school staff and families. And so we're working with them to think about how you then do recruitment, and not just recruitment, but retention for our school parent councils and school site councils. What we find is often that we might do a good job of recruiting. We've had some schools that have done a great job recruiting, but it's about making sure families feel comfortable being retained. We're also doing that for our district level councils, like the AWC working group. And so making sure that we're providing language access there. It's a little more challenging, and we are able to provide interpretation, but we want to think about how we might actually host some meetings in the language of the majority of our families and have the interpretation happen the other way in English. That's something that we've done before. We would have to do a little more work to really effectively pilot with schools and even with all of our central offices. But part of it is to make sure that we're valuing all of the language of all of our families, and not just using English as the dominant language in which we're holding things. And I see the gavel up, so I'm gonna stop.
Great, thank you so much, Monica, I appreciate it. Thank you, Councillor Mejia. Next up is Councillor Arroyo, and then it'll be Councillor Campbell, and then Councillor O'Malley. Councillor Arroyo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll jump right into the questions. Let's start with the Irving School. When will BPS have a final decision on how the Irving Middle School building will be used? I know there's going to be a community engagement process, but what is the timeline that we're looking at for that decision?
I would say the sort of ideal would be that the plan is for the Irving to close at the end of next school year. What we would like is to make sure that we don't have time where the building sits empty and it's not under construction. So we would like to be in a position where we have at least started design on the new sort of use by next June. But I don't want to let the design and construction schedule dictate the community engagement. In some ways, I think the Irving engagement is going to be one of the more straightforward, because I think there is some consensus in the community around the need for elementary space. The challenge, of course, is that there are 5 or 6 elementary schools right around there who will probably all want to be part of the project. So we just need to figure out how to engage, make sure we're hearing from the communities and setting forth the path for all of them to be K-6 and then modernize the buildings in Roslindale.
And so I think with that answer, you sort of answered the follow-up, but BPS is committed to ensuring that the Irving building remains a BPS property building, correct?
Yes.
Perfect. The second one is regarding the BPS schools, which I think Councillor Mejia kind of went into this in terms of the undergoing the 40.4 million capital repairs in the next year. My question is more so, which BPS schools have had the largest gaps in time since their last capital repair?
That's a great question. I'll need to pull that data and get back to you in terms of what we had published in the last phase 2 report, all the capital projects history from 2013 through 2019. That data has not been updated, so we're updating it. So it may take me a little bit of time, but I will get that answer to you.
And are those gaps, to your knowledge, influencing essentially the timeline of who's getting sort of priority in terms of the equity of distribution on this?
Yeah, so when we did the equity analysis, one of the things that we realized is the baseline facilities condition needs to be the starting point from which we evaluate the equity of any given annual capital budget. And I think this is what you're getting at, which is, you know, it's one thing to show that we're doing repairs to a building. It's another if we're doing the 5th project at a building and the others have not gotten any. I will say that will be a big factor in when we lay out the sort of tiers of schools. So then what are the next phase of schools that will be part of a major new build? There is the part of this where if a school has been part of the accelerated repair program for the Mass School Building Authority, we are committing to using those school buildings as schools for 20 or 30 years, depending on which system they replaced. And so because we've done a lot of those projects, that will start to reveal to us which are the buildings we're allowed to take offline without having to pay the MSBA back. And so that's going to inform, and part of our goal for transparency is to publish that so that you can come back and say, you know, no, build BPS, that's not how I would prioritize, or people in my district want us to prioritize. And we can start to tweak it as a community.
Okay, and then, you know, I'm a product of BPS, and I think the last school when I was in BPS that I remember getting built was Orchard Gardens up by Melnia Cass. And I remember at the time, the thing that was most striking to me as a high school student, but also something that had been mentioned a lot, was how closely our new buildings resembled sort of detention centers, or like literally resembled sort of the architecture of jails and prisons in terms of how they're formulated and formatted, the bells, the lines, all the different things that we do. When we're putting significant capital into sort of redesigning how we want these buildings to appear and how we want them to affect learning and affect the children in the building, how much emphasis are we putting on ensuring that our designs don't have that same unfortunate thing where people look at them and say, you know, this sort of looks a little bit like South Bay to me in terms of the designs and the ways that we're prioritizing window space and this and that and the other. What are we doing to have equitable design that actually takes into account all of these different sort of mental and societal factors of what space can be?
Yeah, what a great question. And I think, you know, it's interesting for us to look back on different phases of construction and see design ideas that turned out really to be a bad choice.
Yeah, we're not City Hall, right? But there's
yeah, we have some of those, you know, we have some of those buildings, right? The buildings that were all part of the open architecture movement.
But I would say that the bowling building is a reflection of, it has light, it has these flowing open spaces, it has all of these things that are supposed to be welcoming, inviting. And I just think one of the major things for me that I would like to see, especially since the Irving is in my district, but also as we do this across the city, is a conscious decision to ensure that we're creating open, inviting, welcoming spaces that sort of harken away from cookie cutter blueprints that don't create that kind of vibrancy and that kind of community. So that's both a question and a little bit of a statement. And so I hope that, I guess the question is, when it comes to the design aspect of the Irving and any of these other schools, is that something other than just saying this is the kind of school we want? When we get to the redesign, the rebuild, because we know that's coming, how much community engagement is going to be involved in that process in terms of things as small or as big as where windows are and how we're reflecting these spaces?
Yeah, I think that's great. I would just emphasize, I think there's multiple phases of the project that will involve community. And this is the type of feedback we want from our communities. The first is when we built Orchard Gardens, we also built Mildred Ave and the Lilla Frederick at the same time. You can see common design elements because that was probably the last time the district had a building program that said, we're going to build these schools in these neighborhoods with minor tweaks based on the community. We need to come up with what our design principles for our K-6 schools, what are our design principles for 7 to 12 schools. As part of that, you will have the opportunity and members of the community will be able to say, our design elements, our design principles need to be trauma informed. They need to be open. They need to be accessible. There's a lot of these things that we can put into a proposal that says, okay, when we work with designers, you have to have this. These are our non-negotiables. The second part is on a school-specific project like the Irving. Once we have identified what schools will be part of the project, one or more of the existing Roslindale elementary schools, we will then work with the community in a process to design it. And it's a conversation with the designers who then come back with a number of proposals and sort of visuals. And that's where you see, drawings, theoretical drawings, which we're going through right now with the Josiah Quincy. So for people can react to and say, this doesn't represent what we're looking to do. So there's both the big picture, what's our direction, and then in an individual project, what does it actually look like for the Irving School? Because there's a need there to sort of deinstitutionalize the look of that building.
That would be fantastic. And I see the gavel. Madam Chair, will you grace me with one question? Literally one question, no statement, just one question.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Obviously, this year's exam school admission process was done by a zip code quota situation. I supported that. I would prefer we not go back to entrance examinations for our selected admission schools. But my question on that is, if the exam school process continues without an entrance exam, similar to this last year, how is BPS planning on making sure that students and families are aware of the opportunity to attend these schools? Since I think primarily the way that was done was you had to register for the exam and there was like a sort of a push for registration for the exam. So how is BPS making sure that families know that there's an opportunity for these selected admission schools moving forward?
I can talk a little bit about what we did this year. So we actually sent mailers home to every BPS family whose child was in either grade 6 or 8. So they've been going into the 7th or 9th grade, as well as our non-BPS families in the city for whom we had contact information to inform them as well. We ask schools, BPS and non-BPS schools, to share this information as well, just as many ways as possible. And again, engaged and really a bit of a media blitz, both ethnic media as well as standard media and some of your traditional media ways of getting information out. And for BPS students, we did additional outreach in terms of phone calls for students who were eligible. So I think as wherever we land, we know the task force is still working in terms of their recommendation that is going to move forward to school committee. But we do expect to not to shift or reduce the amount of outreach that we've done this year. We found it to be very effective, and particularly a lot of families of color who we had probably would not have reached before talked about some of the mechanisms, including some of the personal phone calls and the use of ethnic media that were helpful. So I think we will continue to do those things to make sure we're reaching our broader community. And I am always open to any feedback or suggestions you have as well.
So I appreciate that. And the one suggestion I would have is maybe it makes sense to just include every 7th grader or 9th grader, 8th grader going into that, every 6th grader going into that, into the pool automatically, so that they're instead making a decision as to whether or not they want to attend, not whether or not they want to apply, so that they just know that they have that decision made. I think that would be helpful. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor Arroyo. Next up, we have Councillor Campbell, and then it'll be Councillor O'Malley, Councillor Edwards, and we were joined some time ago, my apologies for not noting it, by Councillor Ed Flynn from District 2. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and hi, everyone, and thank you for the presentations. It's horrific to be on Zoom when it's 80 degrees outside, so really thank you to each and every one of you. Continuing on Build BPS, I'm going to keep saying that the Sarah Greenwood, I am prioritizing that school as just needing immediate repairs. I know I've been in touch with the district as well as my chief of staff about the Greenwood, but want to lift it up in the budget hearing as well. But continuing sort of in a line of questions related or similar to my council colleagues, for the schools that, or school buildings that are prioritized or coming sort of by October. So how is the district, how will the district determine how to prioritize those schools? Will family and student voice play a factor in these decisions? And if so, what that would look like? And I apologize if you answered these before, I don't think so, but. And then in the sort of long-term plan, will it include details on swing spaces that school communities can transition to while their buildings are being renovated? So that's one set of questions. And then I have one more depending on time.
A great question. Thank you for the chance to talk about. And I think in a lot of ways, we're trying to do something that we've not done before in terms of the level of transparency around school buildings. What I would imagine we're going to do, or what we're planning to do in the fall, is come back to the community with some options for how we would prioritize the next round of new buildings. So one version of that is it has to take into account student need. So we know we need to prioritize the McKinley in the same way that we have prioritized the Horace Mann or and the Carter School in the South End. So one is based on student need. The second is we need a really good assessment about what are the educational facilities that we think every school needs to have and who's the farthest from having those facilities. So for instance, if we think every school needs to have a gym, a cafetorium, it needs to have a library, and we need an assessment of which are the buildings that are furthest from that. And then there's just basic facilities conditions, which are the buildings that we think are the biggest challenge or biggest sort of risk of becoming the next Jackson Man. There's going to be a balance of those. And then there's going to be a question about like, okay, if it has the educational facilities that we need, but it needs to be upgraded in terms of just repairs, then we may be prioritizing those buildings for repairs. And so in October, it's not going to be an answer. It's not going to say, these are the next 10 schools that are going to be built. It is going to be the start of a transparent list of saying, here are the ways that we could prioritize. Now the community can give input and say, you're missing this criteria, or we think you've failed to include this sort of prioritization.
Okay, so that's sort of being, Nate, developed, but so sort of to be determined in many ways.
Right.
This project, okay. Because as you can imagine, when it comes to family, students, folks not only want to see not only just the level of transparency be better, but also have a sense of what the prioritization is going to look like, and then how, of course, they can weigh in as well. So that's helpful. We'll continue to stay in contact on that. The other question I have is on the Timilty. That was my middle school. It's a lot of emotions with respect to that middle school. Incredible institution. And I think even as the district was planning these transitions from to a K-6, K-8 model, there are a lot of folks who are really pushing back on keeping the middle school separate. And the Timilty was one example of that. Those sort of middle years and the need to create a separate space for students. They just did incredible work there, not only when I was there, after I left. So obviously it's closing and slated to close next year. But in the meantime, you have a population of students, right? They're going to need a lot, and there's only so much resource you can pour in. It's almost like the Edwards, right? Before you have to transition these families one by one to a school of their choosing. So what does that transition look like? What does the upcoming school year look like for the students at the Timilty, the Irving, who are going to have to grapple with a major change for them and their families in the community?
Yeah, as you know, we did more this year to stabilize schools experiencing enrollment decline, to make sure that as schools decrease in enrollment, we're not seeing a significant change in the student experience. That was always the plan with the Timilty and the Irving. As we've transitioned, we made sure that they had the resources and staffing to be able to maintain their program and partnerships without we didn't want this to feel like a phase out or where students are continuously seeing cuts to services. I think one of the challenges, and honestly, this was a major motivating factor for us to make this change now, because in a lot of ways, the timing doesn't feel right to be announcing school closures, because families are not choosing to enroll in our standalone middle schools. They are seeking other configurations that the district has expanded over the last decade, including Commonwealth charter schools, that there's not enough students to maintain the robust experience that you may have had at the Timilty. And so we need to make a change, because it's not just about the money. It's not just about the staff. It's about the sort of full community and a lively, fully enrolled school building. And so that's part of our motivating for change, is before enrollment declines to the point where it becomes really a sort of unfortunate student experience. We wanted to make this change and transition the schools, and that's really the push that we've made, and why we decided to transition the Irving and the Timilty at the end of next school year.
That's helpful, and we'll stay in contact with you guys. A little emotional, I will tell you, but very helpful. And then the last question is just, it was from the previous budget hearing on advanced work class excellence for all. A lot of parents wanting to know, sometimes I think there's just confusion. What is AWC being phased out? When? What does that look like? How are we engaging families and parents on the difference between the programs, and then sort of where the direction of excellence for all and the direction of AWC?
Thank you for that question. So there's currently a working group that the superintendent commissioned to take up the question of where do we move forward with AWC in light of declining enrollment, in light of the desire of a lot of families to have such a program, as well as in light of EFA, Excellence for All, as a program, and understanding the value that has brought to many of our schools. And so that working group is currently meeting on a weekly basis. So we expect that they will have a recommendation to the superintendent by the end of the school year, and that the superintendent will then bring a recommendation to the school committee. So for families who are going through the process this year, they did have options and access to programs in terms of transferring into one of the existing AWC schools, of which there are only 5 left. But we hope to be able to share a lot more of that over the summer and in the fall, once what we know we're doing leading up to our registration period in January, so families will know well in advance.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And going back, I guess I neglected to say this, and this is, I guess, for you, Nate, just as the district is planning on what to do with Irving, Timilty, all of the various buildings, I'm assuming it's going to be a part of this larger conversation around the infrastructure build BPS conversation as well. The Timilty was sort of being put into that. Yes. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect.
So that'll be both a major renovation and a conversation with the community around the future use of that building. So doing it with the community, not to the community.
Thank you. And I see the gavel. Thank you all for the great presentations. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. And I know, Megan, did you want to get in briefly?
Yeah, I just think, I want to lift up something, Councillor Campbell said about this is emotional, right? And we've talked a lot about this at BPS here, about these difficult decisions that we're making right now that are really hard for families, really hard for staff, really hard for communities. And I want to acknowledge that. And I want to, emphasize our commitment to really supporting these families through this transition. But these decisions are the decisions that we need to make now to keep the district moving forward in the right direction. And, I think that these are the hard things in a hard time. I said this the other day that, we're providing more uncertainty in an already uncertain time, and that doesn't feel good. And there are a lot of questions that counselors have raised here today that are very valid questions that we don't have complete answers to, because we still are committed to doing this real community engagement to determine these things. And so I think that well, it might seem like we don't have a plan for each school. It's because we have to talk to folks about what that actually looks like. So I just really want to emphasize that this is an authentic community process that we have to go through together. Obviously, we have some ideas. Chief Cooter indicated some thinking of some of the projects that could potentially go there, but this is an ongoing conversation for several months.
I appreciate that, Megan. And not only we talked about this, the need for BPS to over communicate to families, a real sense of distrust in community and how to rebuild, being authentic. People would rather you hear, I don't have a plan just yet, than to pretend you do, or that you're cooking one up somewhere and then going to just sort of give it to them versus including them. So this is all very helpful, and I appreciate the responses, and we'll stay in touch with you guys. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you.
And God bless you. Get outside.
Well, I try. At least now the sun sets later, right? All right. I think I'm looking for our Council President O'Malley. I think you might have had to step away for a minute. So Councillor Edwards. Councillor Edwards.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Thank you. So, is my camera working now too?
Yes, we can see you and hear you. I mean, you're backlit, so it's like me this morning. You can't really see you, but.
So it looks like I'm doing an interview on, on some, or being interviewed. Anyway, by police, but either way, well, whatever. So if we could go to, I think I want to pick up where you suggested we stop with some of the capital improvements in the last conversation. I know we were going to get some updated information. I think it was from Nate.
The O'Donnell Playground.
Your first question was about the O'Donnell Playground. There's no current project for a sort of schoolyard improvement, the major upgrade of the O'Donnell Playground as of right now. And I don't see it on the list for the repairs, but I know that there was a recent conversation around the condition of it. So you had asked about it in the context of the Community Preservation Act and potentially pursuing that. We do not currently have a capital project for the O'Donnell Playground right now.
So it is a bit disappointing because of the injury, I think, that happened there. And I do think it is worth a breakdown. I know you mentioned that there was a process or some sort of project or way in which you're vetting which schoolyards are getting upgraded. So do you have a list of those schoolyards that are getting upgraded this year?
I do have a list of the current schools that are part of the schoolyard initiative that we can share with you. And then the schoolyard repairs are the part where we are doing different projects to either resurface a playground or make a fix to an existing playground. And so we can share. There's also, I will say, so part of we do have a challenge around using data to really inform and put a plan together for our capital projects. So I don't want to sort of over-represent how these projects get picked in any given year. The other thing that we do is we do maintain a certain reserve for us to be able to identify capital repairs that as we sort of either discover an issue or something breaks, that we can have some flexibility around that. So I can flag the O'Donnell again with the team, and just one of the challenges that we always have, and this carries over from the operating principle too, which is if we're going to do it for one school, we want to find all schools in similar situations and be able to fund them. And I think this has been a real threat to equity on the capital side and our ability to sort of be data driven in how schools get selected and put on a plan. So that was a long-winded way of saying I'll send you the list of schools that are on the current plan, and then we need to certainly the safety issues are going to be addressed at the O'Donnell Playground, but we'll follow up on that as well.
Yeah, it is a concern. I mean, I would say O'Donnell's incredibly diverse, and I don't think that you're going to find an equity issue in terms of it's being prioritized over other schools that may have less resources. The O'Donnell has been waiting a while for some upgrades in and outside of the building. And I think in East Boston, we have some of the oldest building stock in terms of BPS schools. So I do appreciate that you guys started the lunch program in East Boston and helped to build that out. Did you have we finished that, the My Kitchen, or was the program for fresh lunch throughout all of BPS?
We're in the 4th year of that. It's the 4th phase of that. And finalizing, there were 19 additional cafeteria projects that will be done this summer. And there are a handful of schools where we are not able to complete the projects this summer, but we will, that is, and it has been a major accomplishment of the Build BPS to be able to roll out what was formerly known as My Way Cafe. And you're right, that is a great example actually of a district-wide initiative that we were launching, and one where we used equity to be the driving force. So we started by using our opportunity index to identify the highest needs neighborhoods and where we saw the biggest gaps between what we wanted for cafeterias and access to fresh foods and where we had it. And East Boston, you're right, has, I think, the oldest average school age buildings. If not, it's one of the top 3 neighborhoods in terms of that, which is not a list we want neighborhoods to be on. And so that's part of the reason that we're prioritizing Paris Street as a major upgrade. And it's why My Way Cafe was started in East Boston.
Well, that was a great pivot, and see how describing how the system and analysis works and how it was great in the pilot program that moved on. Kudos to that. I learned that skill set in law school. I mean, that was in part excellent. But anyway, looking at some other points. Now I know we have resolved the issue on the buses, the bus lot and the Owens lot in terms of BPS school buses no longer being there. I am still concerned about I'm sorry, Councillor Bach, this is probably more fitted for our bus transportation hearing on BPS. I will leave that conversation over there. So back to capital improvements then. I did want to talk a little bit about the modular classrooms at the Warren Prescott, and I understood they were a temporary build out to help with providing capacity and space. It was part of a budget. Are you seeing those modular classrooms and the Edwards build out as kind of complementary?
There's certainly the potential for us to solve some challenges for the Warren Prescott. The Warren Prescott does have temporary modulars that were there to add as they had some increased enrollment needed to address classroom space. We leased those modulars. There was a 3-year lease with the option to extend 2 more years. So it's not a pressing need to replace those modulars from a budgetary perspective. Mm-hmm. The Warren Prescott also, as you know, we have to lease space at the Boys and Girls Club to give them access for gym, and there's a lease at a building across the street for additional classrooms. So I do think that one of the opportunities that we would, or conversations we would have with the community around the Edwards building is how might we think about using the Edwards building as a complement to the Warren Prescott, in the same way that we would ask the same question of the Harvard Kent as well. I mean, the nice thing about Charlestown is there's not that many schools that we would be talking about. So it's a much more limited set of options.
All right. And so just swinging over then, I think, to the Omana School in East Boston. I was there during a rainstorm and seeing some flooding and some infrastructure concerns around their playground and how it basically just took on all the water. I'm not sure if that was intentional or if there's going to be some sort of flood mitigation that we do behind the Umana to protect that school infrastructure. But I wanted to highlight that as a concern as we're going to be developing more on the waterfront in East Boston. And then finally, if you could just repeat for me the build out schedule for the high school for this fall. It's happening this summer, right? And maybe, I mean, if you want to give me more details about specifically what that build out looks, I see the gavel. So you can send this to me later, what specifically the build out looks like. There was debate whether you're building over the parking lot or if you're just coming up with a separate entrance and there's no additional build on the building. So you can maybe give you those details later.
Yeah, well, I'll follow up on the plans for East Boston construction in the 712.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thanks so much, Councillor Edwards. Next up is Councillor Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bach, and apologize for being late. And thank you to the BPS team that is here. I just had a couple issues I wanted to highlight. Okay, so many of my schools in my district, such as the Perkins School, the Condon, the Blackstone in particular, they're located almost within BHA. Like the Perkins is literally located in the BHA development. The Condon is located in BHA development, and the Blackstone is located across the street from the Cathedral, and basically across the street also from Villa Victoria. It's not BHA property, just down the road from Castle Square. And I know a lot of my students in my district cherish the AWC program, especially from those areas, especially from public housing, especially from the communities of color in the South End and Chinatown. Castle Square is one of the largest, most diverse areas, as is Villa Victoria. But why are we watering down the AWC program if it's effective? And are we able to give some of these students that go to some of these schools or live in public housing an opportunity to be engaged in the AWC program, such as, you know, if you're living at the Cathedral public housing, do you deserve a shot at the AWC program? And I would argue yes, as well as the Villa Victoria, obviously a large Puerto Rican community, 80% Puerto Rican in the Villa Victoria. But what is the status of the AWC as it relates to some of the students I highlighted?
So I don't have specific data for you today in terms of AWC. What I can say is that we do still have the 5 schools this year are implementing an AWC program. The working group that is working on this issue is really looking at how do we expand access. So to your question of how do we ensure that more students are able to access, it's really looking at how do we expand access to rigor, which is what our families have been asking for. For AWC specifically, we have seen declining enrollment over the years, which is why we want to think about what are the effective pieces around rigor that we've learned from AWC. What have we learned from Excellence for All, which is also a rigorous program model, but it is across the grade level, to then be for the working group to make an informed recommendation to the superintendent about how we provide access for all students to the rigor that families are looking for.
But is the AWC program a success in terms of educating our students academically?
So I think in terms of AWC, we can always come back with data. I think the question is not about whether AWC does prepare our students. And in fact, I will say AWC has mixed models. So for many years, we have run what we call hybrid models, where it is not just students who tested into AWC, which tells us that all of our students, if given access to rigor, can meet that bar. It's really about our ability to provide it in every classroom, not just an AWC setting. And that is demonstrated through our programs where we have students who did not test in. That said, I think the bigger issue around AWC is really that access that we want to provide for all of our students, as opposed to having limited seats, which I think also is part of what you may be hearing from some of your constituents is that ability to have access. We have 5 schools that does not provide the level of access for all of our families who might be looking for access to rigor.
Does that program need to be expanded, the AWC program? I would support expanding it. And here we are in budget season. If we need money for the budget to expand a program, let's advocate for it. But if it's working, if it's successful, you know, I would advocate for expanding a program that's working. I've always advocated for something that's working.
Yeah, and I think to expand a program where we're seeing declining enrollment is part of the challenge. So while we know that some families really are seeking access, we do see that enrollment in AWC has declined significantly over the years. And so as we're making decisions, we want to make sure we provide access to rigor, but in a way that our families will actually take advantage of the opportunity.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I advocate for my constituents, and I represent the most residents living in public housing of any district city councilor. I share Mary Ellen McCormick with Frank, and I have West Broadway, and I have Old Colony, I have Villa Victoria, I have Villa Victoria, Castle Square, West 9th Street. Obviously, the South End is one half subsidized housing throughout the whole South End. So I just need to do my due diligence of advocating for my constituents as well.
And Councillor, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I just want to make sure I'm really lifting up with what Chief Roberts is saying, because it's good practice in public policy, as you know, when you start to see, you know, enrollment declines, to ask the question of why and what can we be doing. And so I really think here what we're doing with AWC is we've kept the classes that we have, but we're really asking ourselves the question of how do we expand this to this opportunity, this rigor, this level of work, right, across our schools. So it's not just these 5 schools that have these opportunities and students at those schools, but it's really something that we're doing across the district. So there's this working group that's going to be making recommendations. You know, we're open to feedback on that piece, but I really, you know, we have a responsibility, right, as public servants to do an assessment when we start to see and those numbers decline, and ask ourselves that question of why, so how we can make it better for the future.
Yeah. Okay. Then my final question is, what public outreach are we doing to their parents and public housing throughout the city, in making sure that programs are available to these parents that may or may not speak English? They may or may not have a computer. They may or may not, you know, other related issues. But I have a lot of parents that don't have computers, that don't speak English. You know, what are we doing for them? How are we reaching them? You know, Asian families, Puerto Rican families, I have a large number in my district, public housing families. Are we knocking on their doors and handing them information about programs? Because you see how public housing, some of the mail is just left on top of the mail slot. I want to make sure my constituents receive the same level of services as other constituents do, and at times I don't think they do. So I want to know how are we reaching these families?
I can take that one. So I think some of the things you've talked about is why we're experimenting with different types of outreach, and particularly leveraging ethnic radio. That's one of the biggest pieces of feedback, as the superintendent has engaged in almost 2 years of community engagement. It's really about how do we leverage ethnic media that our families are using, and so we are doing that. We're also experimenting with new things such as geofencing and really being able to have ads pop right up on families' phones. A lot of our families are using streaming services. So we're going to where our families are using services, in addition to leveraging partners within a community who are servicing our families and have the relationships on a deeper level than we might even have as a district. So those are some of the ways I see the gavel up. So I don't want to go on for too much longer, but those are some of the ways. And again, we have historically also have gone to some of our public housing to do information sessions. Those are things that we do in terms of getting boots on the ground, and happy to do those if there are particular areas that you have concerns about.
Yeah, that would be helpful. I was actually talking to Kenzie about that. Unity Day is one of the best days in the city, and maybe BPS can join BHA and have a booth there providing some information about some of the services that you provide. Certainly I'll be there at the Unity Days, and maybe we could coordinate and get a list of them and have a BPS presence there about what services might be available to residents.
Love that. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Block. I know I went over a couple minutes, so thank you for giving me the time.
All right, Councillor Flynn, you were certainly not the first, so thank you. All right, and I totally agree. I think there's always room for more coordination between BPS and BHA, I think. We've come to me, so I'll ask some questions, and then for councillors who are still here, I will do a quick second round as well. So if you have any more questions, I'll come back to you. Set myself on alarms, otherwise I lose track. So I guess my first question, Nate, it's for you, and it's really about, so you showed the graph of the 10-year $1 billion build BPS commitment. But my understanding is that $1 billion is basically already obligated by the existing school projects that we have committed to. And I'm thinking here about things like the Josiah Quincy, like the Carter, like, so am I right in thinking that $1 billion has basically already been committed?
There's still quite a bit of the future year $1 billion budget that has to do with our capital repairs program and sort of how do we balance the different repair and district-wide initiatives. And so the major projects fill it fairly quickly in terms of the cash flow, but they're also the new projects. A lot of what we're committing to the cash flow are out so many years that we are starting to think about what happens beyond those 10 years, and the plans that we start making when we start talking about 2 to 3 new buildings will not be part of this 10 years. It'll be part of the next 10 years. But there's still a lot within the allocation for Build BPS and some of the assumptions around the cash flow about those district-wide initiatives and continued repairs. And we can make trade-offs as a community if we think we should invest more in schoolyards, or if we should take some of the money from security improvements and shift it over to other initiatives. I will say we are doing major upgrades to bathrooms and to water. Those, like My Way Cafe, we're hoping to be 3 to 4 years projects where we go and upgrade across the district, in which case we can then move on to the next upgrade. And so in terms of the detail of what's actually committed, I can go back and work with OBM to pull what is the latest cash flow in terms of committed project versus available sort of to be allocated for the remaining 10 years.
Yeah, I think the thing I want to flag as Ways and Means Chair is that like the BPS capital budget is the city capital budget, right? And it's us who take 2 votes 2 weeks apart to indebt the city. And I think that, a real, like a capital plan that does a lot of the reimagining that you guys have talked about is what makes sense. And I think that, people have been waiting for us to talk about it for a while. And I think it's great that we're there. I think that I just need BPS to get that for the council, it can't just be like, 5 schools. It has to be like, this is the debt service schedule. Like, this is the scale of the amount of, we have a 7% policy limit, right? This is the amount of that we think probably we would have to spend on BPS in order to do these things that we're doing. Like, this needs to be a real financial decision, which means that the council, and I know that that's mostly not what you're asking us to make in this year's capital vote. I know that, right? Like, because it's, we're voting on, the continuation of projects that have mostly already been in the mix, right? But I just want to flag that for the council, like there needs to be that kind of quantitative sketch of where we're going at a strategic level in terms of the portion of our sort of debt limit and stuff that this is going to take up, because it's exciting. Yeah. It's also competing with us, you know, wanting to get more, like, you know, we started to put more housing on the capital budget. We're talking about the climate plan, right? Like I'm a big, like, oh my gosh, how do we maximize the capital spending we're doing? Because I think like everything you build in a city, as you are seeing, you use for 100 years. And so it's always worth it to build it today. But it can't crowd out the operating spending, because we need the operating spending for everything else that you all want to do, right? So I just want to flag that I do think that we, like, if BPS wants to push this kind of, like, you know, the sort of next level of strategic capital spending, that there does need to be that level of detail coming before this committee.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, you know, one of the big things about Bill BPS that was sort of a game changer for us as a district was the city coming to us and saying, okay, we're going to make a 10-year $1 billion commitment, lay out what your plans are within this cash flow. Every time before that was really about annual appropriations or one-off projects. So we didn't sort of have the runway or the ability to go and say, okay, here's how we're going to lay this out. We then very quickly got into a few building emergencies, and we needed to address some of the configuration changes. And now we're moving into that phase where we're about to say, okay, what is the long-term building plan? How many buildings do we need? What will be the cost of those buildings, so that we can then do exactly what you're saying, is ask the community for a commitment to us to build these schools every single year. And if communities come back and say, you're not getting to our school fast enough, advocate for us to get the more capital dollars. But right now, I think it is a limitation that when we say, if we got more capital dollars, what's next in the queue? How do we know that's the right school to build next? How do we know that's equity is informing this decision? And so that's why we're excited about this next phase of just being very transparent about, this is the queue of schools. This is when we think we're going to get to every school in terms of large chunks. But it's a daunting task, but I appreciate what you're advocating for, which is, you know, really, how do we ensure that we're being fiscally responsible and not asking BPS to sort of fit in the margins of the capital plan for the city, that we're a core part of it. And I would say that's on us as a district to get organized more than it is on the Public Facilities Department, City Budget Office. They've been great partners and supports to us as we've gotten organized over the last few years around this. And so I'm looking forward to continuing to partner with them to do exactly what you're asking for.
Yeah, and that also lets us be strategic about what should be MSBA projects, right? And all these, I mean, just, so you think you're going to have, it's going to be by October that you're kind of in a place of talking about, here's a draft schedule?
Yeah, sort of the draft schedule being these are the schools that are in the next bucket. Right. We start thinking about the sequencing of, you know, the different versions of, this is if we prioritize, you know, geographic distribution. This is if we prioritize high schools. So that next year, when we get into the capital budget, we start to ask for the next 2 or 3 projects that are going to be launched, you see how that information and a greater sense of cash flow coming together. My only hedging is that this is like, we have not been this organized. And so I am, you know, the superintendent is certainly committed to getting more organized around this. But we're sort of making a promise to do something we have not done in quite some time.
Which would, of course, be essential for the kind of scale of right? It's a shift. Absolutely. On a number of fronts. Yeah.
That's right.
We will get there. That is our goal.
Great. I would like, in the meantime, like, I don't think it's too much for the council to ask, based on the projects that are in the pipeline right now, like the ones that are in the program, how much of the $1 billion is obligated? Where are we on that? And that is something I would like. I guess that, yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, yes, we will work with OPM to get that to you.
All right, great. And then could you, have you, and on this front, I'm curious whether, so I'm a big fan of using our public sites and buildings for public purposes, and keeping that. So I think it's great that as you guys talk about the portfolio, you're thinking about how do we reposition what the school is doing, but we're still we're gonna have a school at that site where the Jackson Man is in the long run, right? That kind of thing. I am also interested in BPS sort of broaching this topic that we've broached so far, mainly vis-a-vis libraries on the city side, which is this housing on public assets idea. And I think it's sort of it's a solution to one of two problems. Either you're building mixed income housing with a sufficient market component that there's some cross subsidy opportunity, which might be a situation where it helps us expand getting BPS's capital budget done and its timeline. Or you're building 100% affordable stuff where it's not clear that it helps in that sense, but it does help solve another need of the city at a zero land cost, right? And there might be some, and we all see the impact of a lack of housing affordability on our BPS families. So depending on the mix, that's sort of two different types of solution and problem. But I am curious, Nate, as you embark on this, on this kind of grand build BPS 2.0 thing, where your guys' thinking about that is.
Yeah, I think we need to explore all possibilities for acquiring land and using our land well. I think it's both figuring out how to work better with developers. I've had some initial conversations with the BPDA around how do we get involved in these projects when it is a private parcel and there's an opportunity for community mitigation. How do we leverage those projects? And then I know we've had some conversations, really preliminary stage, around our existing school sites, those that have high value. Could we think about doing some sort of schools with community housing or a community benefit on the top in their higher density? It's still too early to say that we're definitely going to be moving in that direction, but it is something that we should and will continue to explore, because I do think, to your point about the cash flow, when we are launching something of this scale, when we're talking about doing something this transformative, we need to be creative, because land is not exactly plentiful throughout the city. And so we need to immediately start to figure out what is our plan for acquiring the parcels that we need in the neighborhoods where we need them, and maintaining that flexibility going forward to respond to shifting demographics and shifting the shifting real estate market throughout the city.
Yes, and I would just say that I think that it is a place where BPS cannot stand apart. And what I mean by that is you guys are used to, you've got school committee, you're a huge entity, you're used to doing a lot of things off on your own. But when you talk about land acquisition and site control, that's BPDA. When you talk about a bunch of the scheduling and stuff, it's PFD and budget, and it's and the debt limit that you're dealing with, like I said, is the cities, right? And so it has to be measured against where we are on the environmental stuff, where we are on all of on housing, on all of the building that we're trying to do on the public side. So I just think that, and I guess my point is, it seems like if BPS is going to do coherent long-term capital planning, then it would be silly if it took BPS 10 years to get to the place of where the city has gotten to with housing on public assets is oh wait, hang on, we don't have a lot of land, we have a major need, it's hard to get the affordability we want, we can get that affordability if we don't have any land costs, right? There's a whole the Boston Housing Authority has gotten to the high density cross-subsidization side, right? So I just feel like all of our city agencies should be in close enough connection that there isn't a 5 to 10 year lag on learning some of those lessons as we think about integrating a more robust BPS capital budget into the overall city capital budget. So I'm just flagging that as an area that I'm going to push on.
We need to be humble enough to ask for help from those who have expertise And I certainly am ready to ask for help. I've had some great conversations with our city partners. I think from parks to BHA to Boston Planning and Development Agency, we need to coordinate with them, and I'm looking forward to getting their help because we are asking, this is going to be a community-wide effort to upgrade and make sure that our students have the buildings that they deserve. And we are, for too long, this city has not built schools, and you're exactly right. We cannot wait another 10 years to make sure that we are sophisticated in how we approach this. So I appreciate that and look forward to those conversations.
Great. Well, my own timer went off on me, so I have to go back to my colleagues. Councillor, I think it's Councillors Braden, Mejia, and Flynn here. Councillor Braden, do you have second round questions?
I probably haven't. I think we've a lot of my questions have been asked by colleagues, and your questions about the capital budget planning and all, and land acquisition and building more densely has answered many of my questions. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor Braden. Councillor Mejia?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Bach, for that lightning round of good questions to Nate, kept him on his toes. And even his filibustering was worth listening to right now. So thank you, Nate. I'm teasing you. But I do think that you're onto something in terms of really thinking about how we build and being intentional about that building. So I hear oftentimes from educators who can't afford to live in the city of Boston. And we might be able to have an opportunity to really figure out how we can both address some of our housing crunch, issues, as well as our building, right? So not to say that the teachers are going to live where they teach, but just to really be thoughtful about what this looks like moving forward. Because, in every hearing I talk about the fact that a lot of folks are feeling displaced. They can't afford to live here in the city of Boston. A lot of these things are tied into our schools. So if there is a pathway that we can build with more intentionality, where we can also look at the housing crunch that we see, I think that you might find a win-win, Nate, there. I really do think that you're onto something there. And then I also do agree with Councillor Bach. Like, we get 35 hearings all back to back, and we have to read a 20,000 page, Bible. And, then we do these mad dash hearings where we spend 7 minutes per person. And it just feels like a bit of a rush to really talk and be thoughtful about these big dollars, right? And I think a lot gets lost in this process. So if there was a way, Councillor Bach, and I know that the charter will probably forbid anything from happening differently, but I just think even if we're having working sessions with BPS earlier, let's just, once this budget gets voted on in June, if we can set up a series of conversations and we can be more engaged in those dialogues, or if there's ways for us to participate, Nate, in some of these community conversations that you're having, I think it'll just be helpful to have some voice in that space that kind of helps us think through what you all are thinking, why you're making the decisions that you're making, because it all makes sense, right? But I just do think that there is definitely an opportunity for us to lean in a little bit earlier so that we're not trying to rush this process and make decisions that are going to impact so many of the families that we want to support.
Yeah, I would just say, at the risk of jumping into another filibuster, the one thing that I'm feeling around the capital budget as we started to try and be more transparent with it is, we did a hearing with the school committee, we did a presentation to the school committee that was both way too long and not long enough. And so people have been eager to get deep information about all of these different pieces. What is the schoolyard initiative? How many schools are on it? How do you prioritize? But then we're also trying to go through all of the projects and the major changes. So part of that, what we're trying to do is lay out our big strategy so that we can have this ongoing dialogue and build a common understanding so that you're not sort of being, fed through a fire hose right now of information around new builds and schoolyards and libraries. And then how do we make that information more accessible? And Megan is constantly telling me to say less, but mean more. And so it's like, how do we simplify it for families so they understand the impact on their students? And at the same time, make sure people know that there's a comprehensive plan. So I appreciate your interest in joining us. And I think certainly the community dialogues are intended to be better opportunities for the community to engage and know on a limited set of schools what is the deep impact that we plan to have through the capital planning process.
Yeah, and then the last thing that I'd like to add and advocate for is that we also think about the educators who are in these buildings in terms of design, because I'm sure they have lots of feedback in terms of how their classrooms are set up, and not just so much what we're missing, but I just think that if there's opportunities for more engagement with our educators, I think that that intentionality will go a long way, and also about that building trust. And creating that model of like inclusivity for all. Yeah, I think that would be helpful. And young people too, they should be working in collaboration. I know that then Chief of Education, Ron Dorsey, did a lot of work around design and engaged a lot of youth in that process. So I just think that model resonated. And so if there's more opportunities for us to engage young people in these conversations too, I think it'll also build the workforce development pipeline for young people to get into these types of careers. And I also think that Madison Park, which I'm always going to talk about, I think that we should figure out ways to include some of those students in these conversations and having them work in terms of the design phase. Actually, I'm going to advocate for that. And I just said it. I expect a dissertation about how you're going to make that happen the next time we talk, okay? Thank you.
I will definitely bring in one of my doctoral fellow colleagues to help me with that. But yeah, I think, and when you look at other districts in their capital planning, they have all of these programs that really are how do you incorporate and require projects to include Madison Park. And Michelle Silverio was here at the earlier hearing. We've had conversations about the Parcel 3 project and including students in those projects as it goes out to bid. And the other thing I'll just say is there's a fun part of our curriculum, and I believe it's grade 2 curriculum, where students are asked to write a letter and think about the design of their school and advocate. And so I was working with the curriculum office a couple of years ago to get those letters, and there's one hanging on my wall in my office because there are 22 sets of eyes in every classroom who are looking at it and thinking about how it impacts their learning. And the ideas they come up with are sometimes really creative and fun, but sometimes they really focus in on what's important. How do they interact with the environment that they're in? So I think whether it's embedded in the curriculum or whether it's part of the community process, we have to be hearing the voice of our students because they're going to be the ones innovating and really holding us accountable for making sure the environment respects them and empowers their learning.
And to that note, before I get the gavel, I just want to say that I want to echo Councillor Campbell's advocacy on behalf of the Greenwood. When we think about, all of these upgrades and renovations, I know that school is in need of a little bit of TLC. And so I just kind of want to underscore that and just go on record to say that I really do support Councillor Campbell's advocacy for the Sarah Greenwood, and those students deserve to be heard, and the families as well. Thank you.
I do want to just make sure that counselors know that our facilities team has actually gone over there and planning a walkthrough with some parents and all of that stuff. So do just want to make sure you know that that's happening.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Councillor Mejia. Councillor Flynn?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Block. Hey, Nate. Nate, I talked to last week, I was Commissioner Morales at BCYF about the Blackstone. And I wanted to see if I could work with your team, really facilities team, maybe about doing a report on any outstanding maintenance the Blackstone may have, whether it's BCYF or it's public schools. I know they do need some renovations and improvements, but is this something, you know, this summer we can kind of do a report on what maintenance probably needs to get done short-term and long-term at the Blackstone?
Yeah, I'll need to connect with our facilities team. I know that there was part of the capital project that was put in an assessment of the facility, and it was initially started as a safety project. So I think there's a lot of information there. So let me connect you there. And then I do think that what you are asking for should be a baseline expectation for all city councilors to have information about their school buildings in their district. We're not there yet, but that is part of our plan for transparency for you and for your constituents as well.
Yeah, thank you, Nate. Then the other thing as it relates to Blackstone, you know, I was there a couple months ago, I guess, during the pandemic, but a couple months ago. So when you walk in the front door of the Blackstone, the library, the school library is kind of at the top of the stairs. And it's really not enclosed, and it's kind of, it's noisy from the outside. But can we do something for that school in terms of a better library for them? It's very tiny. It's kind of outdated, and I think they deserve a nice library.
Yeah, I know that there, like I said, there was a capital plan that had to do with enclosing more spaces around classrooms. I'm not sure if it involved the library. We do owe, and I believe, I don't think I'm making a new commitment. I know Sam DePina, our deputy superintendent, and Indy Alvarez, our new chief operating officer, will be working with the school superintendent to communicate with the Blackstone community here in the next few weeks. And I think that should be part of the conversation. So I'll make sure that you're, and by me, Megan will make sure that you're looped in as well to get the latest information on the Blackstone. And I appreciate your advocacy for them. I do think, like you said, the Blackstone is a community that does have a high needs population, serves. And so I do think from an equity perspective, it does, they would sort of rise towards the top of the projects that we would be looking to do.
Yeah, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think a lot of the students, or many of the students, come from East Boston as well, by bus. Many communities of color, but also we have kids from Villa Victoria, kids from the cathedral and into Chinatown. But whatever we can do to be helpful to those students, I think they really deserve it. And then my final question, Nate, is I always have great respect for my favorite school in the district is the Carter School. How's the Carter School doing? I know Mark O'Connor and the staff over there do an excellent job, but what do we do? How are we doing with that therapeutic assistance pool for? It's not necessarily a pool, but physical therapy for our students. How's that going with the school building issue?
Yeah, and I just second what you said. What an inspiring place, the Carter School, and what great work from Principal O'Connor and the entire team there. That project, as you know, we're in partnership with the Mass School Building Authority to build them a brand new school. That is set to go into construction in the fall of 2022. So not this fall, but the following fall. And we're in the final stages of identifying their swing space. So the community will move out of their existing building into temporary swing space when we knock down and rebuild on their current site. You know, that project is moving forward, and I think is going to be one of the more emotional and inspiring new buildings that we open, in 2 years following that. So I'm really looking forward to that project.
Yeah, same here. Thank you, Nate. Thank you to the BPS team. Thanks for taking my questions, but more importantly, thanks for all the work you guys are doing. especially during this difficult time. Kenzie, I have no further questions. Thank you, Kenzie.
Great, thanks so much, Councillor Flynn. Nate, I'm having trouble finding the Appendix F about the revolving funds, but since this is the hearing about them, I wondered if you could just speak to what we've seen this year in terms of those revolving funds. I know there's lots of, for folks watching at home, revolving funds are something where the department takes in some money for a very particular reason and then spends that money on a sort of related purpose. So the classic example elsewhere in the city would be the city takes in some funds for events that happen at the Strand Theater, and then that money is spent on improvements and upkeep at the Strand Theater. And so the use of the money is related to the reason for which the money was paid. It's not taxpayer money. But because you don't want these to sort of over time build up and not have accountability and such, the council authorizes the limits of the amount of money that any revolving fund can hold each year. And so BPS has several of these: a facilities one, a transportation one, a technology one. I think that's right, those three. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I'm trying to find the breakdown, but whilst I look for it, Nate, if you can we have these across the city. A number of them, their normal purposes haven't been happening, or other things have sort of been wonky about them this year, but if you can just speak to that a little bit.
Councillor Bach, I can actually speak to that. So in the appendix, the slide should be in the deck. There should be one slide in the deck.
Yeah, that one's about the comparative. I think that just lists, that's the appendix, right, slide, but that just lists the amounts you're asking us to authorize. So I see that you're asking us to authorize a little bit less for facilities and transportation and the same amount for technology. I'm more interested in kind
of the story.
Yeah, like what's like I found, so for instance, the transportation one, right, had like practically no receipts, $50,000 in FY20, and yet we spent out of it 286, which implies to me that we had built up quite a lot of money there.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, which is kind of something that we're working towards not doing in the future, but that is what happened in that case.
So how much is that holding right now? The transportation one? Because you're proposing that we'll receive 50 and spend 50, so we'll have like a kind of regular year. But when we spent the 286, were we kind of cashing that out, or is there a bunch of money sitting in it?
I believe we moved it over, but I can double check and just double check. Yeah. In the meantime, do you want to talk through just decreases in terms of facilities? I know that one definitely COVID is part of that. Just the revenue from that for that account is around space rentals and events and kind of parking fees. So we're anticipating that being lower than it has been in the past. And same with transportation, that's kind of coming from field trips as the main source. And so that's the decrease there.
Right. And so, and it looks like, so for facilities, it looks like though you received quite a lot more than you spent this fiscal year. So it says that by March 31st, you had received almost $500,000 into it and only spent $94,000. And then it's sort of strange because it says the anticipated receipts are 760 and expenditures 760, which would take some real accelerating of expenditures out of that account over the last couple months. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, which we do anticipate spending. We're kind of catching up on spending, but because our maintenance costs are kind of increased this year, we are anticipating spending the full amount. There's a chance that we'll carry over a small bit and save for some of the invoices that are coming in after the fiscal year ends, but we do anticipate.
Yeah, I mean, obviously part of the benefit of revolving funds is that they don't have to live in the fiscal year do or die thing. But how do you guys, so I mean, I know it's used for repairing and maintaining BPS facilities and like custodial stuff and et cetera, but like, is there a relationship between which schools do the facilities rentals and where the money is spent, or is it all kind of one thing?
It's all kind of, it's mixed together.
Okay. And how do you make a decision about using this as opposed to your sort of general fund dollars?
I think it kind of depends on what the situation is each year.
In what sense?
We do try and have some, so for schools where we're renting out the gym space a lot, and we may need to refinish the floor more often, we do try and make sure that there is a relationship there. I think part of the reason sometimes that may not be a one-to-one is in the case of if there is a project where we are planning to do an upgrade, in the case of, let's say, a theater, we're planning to do the theater upgrade or auditorium upgrade. We may not do repairs in that auditorium for the fees that we collected because there's a capital project that's coming at that auditorium. And then we do try and sort of balance what is the overall need so that we can use this revenue as a way of sort of, supplementing our ability to do maintenance in some of our buildings across. And the other thing I would just say is in terms of the spending that we had started to collect too much revenue in this a couple years ago, and that was something that the city auditor at the time had flagged for us. And so we have shifted the way that we do that oversight and thinking, but it's and really we maintain these accounts really to be able to collect the fees from us from a mechanical perspective or technical perspective.
Right. So just when I'm looking at for instance, the facilities fund, like, is that, so 449,445 is the amount of money that was in that account at the snapshot you took on the 31st. Are you looking at the same thing I am, Miriam?
The full report?
The sort of, the one that tells me what your expenditures and receipts have been, but then it also kind of has an ending current balance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And so, because that to me would suggest that, obviously we don't have much sitting in that beyond what we have built up over so I'm just trying to make sure that I am getting these correctly. Because to Nate's point, that really is, that's the main purpose of our oversight here is to make sure that they don't sort of, become kind of random.
Right.
All right. And then I see technology super small right now. What do you receive? What are the receipts for the tech one come from?
That's from selling back equipment, computers.
Yeah, and we also do, if an employee damages their device, there's a small fee for repairs that's collected through that. But the primary use of that revolving fund is when our Laptops for Learners program is the where we buy a laptop for every teacher. When we refresh that every 3 or 4 years. When we do, we sell off that fleet. And so that's why the limit is what it is.
Yeah, I remember it was quite large last year, and because that was one of those years, and then this year it's nothing. Okay, and then I see, and you sort of spent down, there was a big thing in transportation, or comparatively so, and you spent that down. All right, just wanted to check in on those because, it's part of our work here. And then just to ask a couple more questions before we wrap up. One is just, Nate, you referenced the fact that I think we all know, and it came up at another hearing, that that the McKinley School needs attention. And on the capital side, I think in particular of the two buildings that are in my district, the St. Mary Street and Peterborough Street buildings for the middle and high schools. but obviously that's not one of the big five. So what do you think it means for that to be like in the mix of this coming planning?
Yeah, we need to have conversations with the school and school community around their needs. And I think the next step in the process is to do a study of the buildings and both their facilities condition and the educational adequacy of it. The superintendent has asked us to set aside money in one of our reserves for when we get that project going. I think there's part of it that is an engagement, and then part of it will be a conversation with Cindy Nielsen, the new head of school at the McKinley, and Ethan Domblemont-Burns, the assistant superintendent for special education. He and I were actually talking about that just the other day, and we'll likely be working with McKinley starting in June so that we can start to make progress on that. As I mentioned, we have a number of standalone specialized program schools, the McKinley, the Carter, Horace Mann School. Certainly the McKinley is a high needs population and one that we need to make sure has the facilities that they need to serve them. And so that is a priority of the superintendent and something she's been asking us to launch for a project. So no timeline yet on when the new build will be launched, but we are starting that conversation over the next few months so that we can come back to you hopefully by next capital budget with a timeline for a major project there.
Yeah, I think in the meantime, like I would like to, this is me as a district counselor, this is not the Ways and Means chair. I would like to be looped in to those conversations. I said this at the last hearing, but I feel very strongly like that parent community, there's schools that are really like, even though they draw from all over the city, they're sort of like in neighborhoods. And so you get kind of localized neighborhood advocacy. And so all of us who are district counselors, like we have people bending our ear about them, right? So folks from all over the city might go to the Tobin, but certainly like I'm the one who hears about if there's an issue at the Tobin, right? That needs kind of like political counselor support. And then I feel like when we think about the other specialized schools, that most of the other specialized schools have just had, they've had like vocal organized communities around them that have sort of like bent everybody's ear and made those schools and moving forward on them part of like a political issue that needs solving. And I feel like part of where we are in the McKinley is that hasn't happened. And it feels like I hear the district focusing on it now, and I think there's more like attention across the board. But I guess I want with two of those campuses in my district, I want parents of kids in those buildings to feel like, oh well, I should go to the like local district counselor and talk about my needs and concerns. So I just think, it's just me saying I would love to be looped in that.
Absolutely. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that part of what we want to do with Build BPS and why we've been talking about greater transparency and partnership is that there is the feeling now that the way that you get in the new building queue is by making a lot of noise, by political advocacy. And that is always going to play a role, and it's an important role in our district, but it shouldn't be the only way. And we should have a proactive plan that, clearly states our values and how we are going to get all of our schools to that place and put equity at the center of it. And so, that's the work we have to do, because the reality is that the last few projects, really have been a long time in the making, but have been the product of advocacy, not sort of policy or strategic planning. And so, definitely we'll include you in that. And I think part of what I said to Councillor Flynn is true. What we want to do is provide you as district counselors with enough information to know where your schools are and to be sure that your schools are being taken care of, and that you don't need to advocate. And in the meantime, you can always feel free to reach out to Megan Costello.
Yes. and I imagine there will be some meantime before we're in the paradigm where BPS has perfectly prioritized everything. Nice to see you, Megan. And then similarly, I mean, differently, but the Kennedy, what's our latest thinking about? Obviously, there's an exciting new sort of strategic partnership there. Obviously, there's an immediate move with Wentworth, but where is the thinking on that from a kind of longer term capital planning? Because it's obviously another school. I've got the McKinley that's split across campuses. I've got the Snowden in the Back Bay split across campuses. And I've got the Kennedy. And it often feels like it's hard to optimize for all those things that a school needs in those situations.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, we don't have a clear high school plan that I can speak to right now. That is part of our work over the summer to come back with a short portfolio approach. Snowden and EMK, both schools that are incredibly popular and are an important part of that portfolio. We have a partnership with Wentworth. They're helping this spring to provide space, and we're continuing to work to identify a long-term solution for EMK, but I think it's premature at this point for me to say much more than that.
Okay, well, I'd like to be looped into those conversations too. And then are there any, the like kind of across the board capital improvement stuff that we're doing? Are we doing anything at the Tobin? I know there's a retaining wall that I think was actually in last year's budget, but hasn't happened yet.
Sorry, 1 second, I can tell you. I don't have an update on the retaining wall project at the Tobin for right now. In terms of the plans for the Tobin, there is, they are part of the, so one of our building programs is fire systems and safety. So they're part of the fire systems and safety upgrade. I'd also have to look to see what recent upgrades were either funded and either in progress or.
Yeah, I'd be curious just to know if they're in there, because I think like whether they're in the mix on the bathroom stuff or any of that, like it would just be good to know.
Yeah, there's a lot of schools in a multi-phased approach for the bathroom projects. And I can get back to you in terms of their involvement in that and when we anticipate getting there.
And the same with Windows? Or is Windows is sort of like a bigger lift MSBA thing?
Yeah, windows are a big lift, a very expensive projects. There were a lot of so one of the things that we did this year in response to COVID was $7 million of new window projects to go and fix windows across schools. And I think every school or almost every school was a recipient of window repairs in that way. They are not planned for a window project right now. I'd have to go back and see exactly where they're at in the queue, when was the last time windows were done, and if we would submit them for a window project.
Yeah, no, I just know, the windows there have been a long challenge. I think they had an MSBA boiler project back maybe 5-6 years ago or something. But I'm not looking at it right now, so I'm not sure if that's right. And then, sorry, my last question on them, I just had it and I just lost it. Oh, so not on the Tobin, but just the window thing made me think of, I think the other thing as we think about the big picture capital budget is something that we periodically talk about at the MSBA hearings. And I'll talk about it now because our MSBA hearing that we're having on Friday is going to be efficient. It's the same as with the like climate change work. If the city's going to get into the business of doing something at a scale it hasn't done before for a long time, we have to be in the business of making sure that we have like a theory for how the procurement is going to be more equitable on that stuff. Because it's like, if I just suddenly need to buy, like for instance, when we all needed to buy a ton of Chromebooks all of a sudden when every district was like going for them, like you grab the nearest person who has Chromebooks, right? Like that's just what we had to do last April. Mm-hmm. But if we just passively, like we are going to be doing planning to get to this capital thing. And we shouldn't be like winding up in a situation where then we're building our 5 schools and everything's just in time. And, you know, we're stuck with the world of contracting on all fronts in this sort of where it is. And then it's perpetuating, because when everyone talks about the percentages and the contracts and our city spending, like it's the big projects that drive that, like that drive the numbers on those SKUs. So I just really want to flag, I'm personally becoming more convinced with every MSBA hearing that we need like a customized school window factory run as a local MBE in the city of Boston, and that might actually also speed up the process. But yeah, I just really want to flag that as something that I think I push PFD. I think PFD is thinking about is great at thinking about how to get a project done. I don't think that it's been their business to sort of look up the pipeline at the potential contractors and try to figure that out. I think they're making real efforts and everyone's kind of trying to work together on that front right now. But I just feel like if BPS is going to get into this as a major player, there has to be a real strategic focus on that equitable procurement side as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I wouldn't add much. I mean, we need to have, on the operating side, Naveen Reddy, our new business manager, is working to make sure that we have good protocols in place for equitable procurement. A lot of the work we can do is on the smaller projects, but part of having a cohesive capital plan where we are announcing upfront what our needs are as a community does allow businesses to respond. And if there is a Black-owned business or minority-owned business that wants to prepare themselves to deal with the volume, that they can see the predictability of how many of these projects are going on. So I would, that was a long-winded way of saying, yes, I agree. And we do need that as part of our planning.
Great. Awesome. Well, I just wanted to check, those are all my questions. We were rejoined by Councillor Campbell. So Councillor Campbell, I just wanted to check if you had any final questions.
I'm walking around my house, so on my phone, I apologize for being in and out. Just had another engagement, but I did, want to just say that I appreciated your comments, Councillor Bach, just with respect to the district councilors and the calls we get and the calls we get, right, with respect to not just the infrastructure of particular buildings, but all the other concerns with respect to everything. We really are on the front lines, and we always want to be responsive and making sure that people and our residents, frankly, are getting the responses they need. But politics does get in the way, and I appreciated you, Nate, talking about that, and you too, Councillor Bach. And I think when we talk about equity, it really is about putting policy on paper so that it is fair, that it is objective. It's not about who's making the most number of calls, what neighborhoods are voting at the highest rates, or sending in the accurate amount of donations to campaigns, et cetera. So I really want to stress that, because we're now then going into community talking about equity now and trying to realize that. But communities have seen the politics play out for generations. So I just wanted to say I appreciate folks talking about that, but to also recognize that there's still a distrust in so many communities that have been under-resourced, underinvested in for a long time because of politics. And that distrust is real. And I think the way to respond is not only, of course, to generate a prioritization list going forward around build BPS, move up the timeline, do it with a sense of urgency, et cetera, but to include families in a very thoughtful and meaningful way, and to really target those communities and neighborhoods that have been left out and left behind for a really long time because of politics. And I include District 4 all the time in those conversations, because that has been the reality for many parts of this district for a really long time. So thank you, Councillor Bach, for speaking to that. And just really speaking to also the work of district councilors in particular with respect to the ongoing need to respond with meaningful action and not just, I hear you. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Megan, did you want to say something?
No, I was just, Councillor Campbell and I have had several conversations about this. I've spoken to Councillor, I think everybody on this council, right, about this. So, it's not something we can say, this is not something that's just been developed in this past year. It's not been developed in this past 2 or 3 years. It's really been decades, right? And so all we can say is we're really committed to trying to be as transparent as possible with this planning and process. It is not going to be perfect. We're going to make mistakes. But I think, we are all in this together, right? If we've learned anything from this past year, from this pandemic, it's that, when we pull together, when we hold each other accountable, when we share ideas, like that's when we produce our best work, right? And that's the goal and what we're striving towards. So just wanted to say thanks for those comments.
Great, thank you so much. All right, well, with that, I think I'm just going to go to public testimony and then we'll conclude this hearing. So with thanks to the whole BPS team for being here for a marathon day and to my colleagues for joining both hearings. I will be going now to Jenna Picard Richardson, who has been waiting patiently to testify. And sorry, is it Yana or Jana? You please correct me.
Can you hear me?
Jana, great. Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for holding this hearing, and thank you to all the councilors who have raised such important points. I'm speaking to you from the Sarah Greenwood Parent Council, and you've heard our school mentioned. And on behalf of my colleagues on the Parent Council, I want to say that we're very dismayed that it's taken so long in the city of Boston to be at this place where we are operating from putting equity at the front of what we're considering in terms of where we make our investment. And if that had been the case, then years ago, then the Sarah Greenwood would have received the investment that it really needs. I was just on the school playground and looking at the building because I haven't been able to go inside. But we had 96 windows repaired, but still with the ones that are left, you can see the gaskets. They're flopping it's just incredible the state that the building is in. But I do want to say that I'm confident that regardless of whether, and I'm glad that we are using equity as the yardstick. And I look forward to seeing the Sarah Greenwood on the list of schools that are at the top of the list for investment in Build BPS, because we are a community. We are a school that we have 3 very high need programs, socio-emotional learning program, a language, learning disabled, and a dual language that all serve a community that is very high need, high incidence of family experiencing homelessness, and a community that's 99% Black and Brown. So we know that we will be on the list because by any yardstick, we really need this investment. And yes, and we look forward to hearing from you, Megan, for that walkthrough and scheduling that. And I want to thank Councillor Campbell and Mejia for your support, and the whole City Council for considering the Sarah Greenwood as you go through this process. And we'll see you again in fall.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that testimony. Really appreciate it, and appreciate you sitting and waiting through our long hearing. All right. Well, with that, I think we've reached a conclusion. So we'll see the BPS team again in a week. But in the meantime, this hearing of the Ways and Means Committee is adjourned. Thank you all.